e aí cito tanto a PPG, professor Rubens, quanto o CCS, aqui representado pelo professor Breno, tem nos ajudado nesse processo todo, né? Não seria possível se a gente não tivesse apoio nem do CCS, não tivesse apoio da pós-graduação, da universidade em si, e, evidentemente, o programa não tivesse o apoio das chefias que já passaram pelo DEF. Né? Então, isso é uma construção. Eu digo que um programa como esse, para estar num patamar que se encontra hoje, é uma construção de vários atores. Passam pelos discentes, pelos docentes, pelos dirigentes. Isso é um processo bastante importante, né? A gente fica, de fato, muito feliz em hoje poder estar recebendo todos vocês aqui para esse momento tão importante, né? Que é uma aula inaugural, uma aula do próximo período letivo nosso, né? E que sejam bem-vindos ao nosso departamento. Aqueles que aqui não estão, por algum motivo, sintam-se representados por todos os outros. Agradecer especialmente ao nosso corpo de servidores técnico-administrativos, que são extremamente importantes para que as coisas aconteçam, né? Temos ali Ziliane, Dai, Diego. Está faltando mais alguém? Não, né? São esses que estão por aqui. Então, obrigado a todos, que tenhamos um evento bastante interessante.
Obrigado, Paulo. Então, passo a palavra agora ao professor Breno Cabral, vice-diretor do Centro de Ciência da Saúde da UFRJ.
Bom, boa tarde a todos. Gostaria de saudar a mesa, professor Edmund, nosso pró-reitor de pós-graduação, professor Paulo, chefe de departamento, professor Arnaldo, coordenador da nossa PPGEF, e dar as boas-vindas ao professor Edmund. Um prazer tê-lo aqui. A vida do professor Edmund mostra, como o professor Paulo já bem disse, a maturidade, eu acho, do nosso programa nesse processo de internacionalização. Já recebemos professor, então, da França, da Áustria, dos Estados Unidos, mais de uma vez. Então, isso mostra não só o empenho da coordenação, o empenho de cada docente que compõe esse departamento, o empenho da universidade em fazer um programa cada vez melhor. Quando a gente fala desse tipo de evento, eu falo sempre com muita alegria, que é vê-los presencialmente. Aqui, alunos de graduação e de pós-graduação no mesmo auditório, presencialmente, pelos momentos difíceis que passamos aí com a pandemia, né? Passamos tanto tempo de tela, nos vendo apenas pela tela do computador ou pelo celular. Então, é muito importante a gente frisar esse momento onde a gente pode se ver efetivamente e realizar essa troca de experiência de forma presencial. Acho que esse é o momento de celebrar, efetivamente, de celebrar, como o professor Arnaldo bem disse, a conquista do doutorado. E nesses 12 anos, apesar, professor Paulo, e quando a gente pensa na maturação humana, a gente diz aqui que é um processo talvez tardio ou não, mas foram 12 anos de luta, efetivamente, de muito empenho, e aí, nesse momento, eu parabenizo na figura do coordenador, professor Arnaldo, aí a conquista da aprovação desse doutorado, certamente com muito empenho da nossa pós-graduação, na figura do professor Rubens, não só a abertura do nosso doutorado, quanto a subida de nota do mestrado, que passou a nota 4. Então, isso é uma coisa extremamente importante para a nossa área, extremamente importante para a profissão, para o profissional de educação física, para o professor, porque efetivamente temos um doutorado e certamente estamos qualificando bastante o mercado de trabalho no nosso estado, na nossa região, no nosso país, né? Os alunos de pós-graduação sabem que não é fácil encontrar doutorado específico na área. Não à toa somos o primeiro do Nordeste em uma instituição única. Então, é algo que a gente realmente tem que exaltar. o papel social da nossa universidade, o papel social da UFRN para com a nossa profissão, nesse momento de abertura do doutorado também. Então, parabenizo a todos os professores, o qual tenho o prazer de fazer parte também do quadro de professores desse programa de pós-graduação. Então, dessa forma, eu encerro minhas palavras e desejo a todos uma boa palestra.
Obrigado, Breno. Aí passo então a palavra para o professor Rubens, nosso pró-reitor de pós-graduação.
Bem, boa tarde a todos. Cumprimentar o professor Breno, nosso vice-chefe, mas que já foi aluno aqui da educação física. Aqui dizem que ele aprendeu a dar os primeiros saques, as primeiras cortadas na quadra de voleibol, né? O professor Paulo, que foi contratado lá em 2008, 2009, eu pensava até que tinha sido antes, né, na base que estávamos tentando montar para submeter a CAPES a proposta de um programa de pós-graduação em educação física, né? Mestrado lá atrás. O professor Arnaldo, que chegou depois já, né, desse primeiro momento, que assume, acho que pela terceira vez, a coordenação do programa de pós-graduação em educação física. Nas vezes anteriores, ele tinha uma vasta cabeleira, assim como eu, né? Não sei se coordenar o programa tem algum efeito em relação a isso, né? A professora Isabel, que está ali, que eu lembro que lá atrás sentava lá na pró-reitoria, né? Ela, a professora Petrúcio e o professor Pereira, né? Os três, né, incansáveis em busca de construirmos uma proposta para termos um mestrado em educação física, né? Isso não acontece da noite para o dia, não acontece imediatamente quando nós desejamos, e não depende só da nossa vontade. Depende de um planejamento institucional, estratégico, firme, né, e com metas muito bem estabelecidas. Mandamos a primeira vez a proposta, não deu certo, mandamos a segunda, né, e a cada não, isso servia de estímulo para identificarmos aonde precisávamos melhorar, o que precisávamos melhorar. De lá para cá, apesar da gente achar que 10 anos, 12 anos do programa, né, 21, é muito pouco tempo, é muito tempo, a gente nem percebe que passou e não percebe o quanto mudamos o corpo docente, o quanto mudamos o perfil do aluno, o quanto a sociedade está exigindo habilidades diferentes, tanto do aluno de graduação como do aluno de pós-graduação. Na pós-graduação, nós somos avaliados antes de começarmos, né? Para a gente conseguir abrir um curso de pós-graduação, eu preciso de uma avaliação anterior. A universidade, hoje de manhã, criou um curso de graduação em Relações Internacionais. O CONCEP foi lá, analisou uma proposta, aprovou e já vai abrir vaga no próximo vestibular. Não precisamos de avaliação externa para abrir um curso de graduação, porque somos uma universidade. Mas precisamos de uma avaliação externa anterior e de uma autorização para abrirmos qualquer programa de pós-graduação. E somos anualmente avaliados na pós-graduação e comparados com os demais programas da área. Não é apenas uma comparação com aquilo que a gente produz. É uma competição, é um campeonato brasileiro, né? Estou vendo que o jogo foi domingo, né? Tem um rapaz com a camisa do São Paulo ali, feliz da vida. Acho que desde domingo que ele está com essa camisa, não tirou ainda, né? Vai ficar até o próximo jogo, pelo menos, né? Quando, quem sabe, o São Paulo poderá perder, né? É uma possibilidade. A gente ganha, perde e empata, né? Na pós-graduação é a mesma forma. A gente monta o melhor time, mas esse time precisa competir com os outros para que a gente tenha a aprovação e consiga uma nota. Na última avaliação da CAPES, que saiu ano passado o resultado, os programas da área de saúde melhoraram substancialmente de nota. Subiu de nota a educação física, de 3 para 4, que nos habilitou a submeter a proposta de doutorado, mas nós tínhamos tanta confiança que iríamos subir, que a proposta já estava pronta, né? E subimos de nota não apenas pelo esforço de cada um dos docentes, de cada um dos discentes, do esforço de pegarmos as divergências, que sempre são muitas, e minimizarmos para maximizar as convergências em um projeto institucional, em que todos queriam melhorar a nota, em que todos queriam ter a possibilidade de ofertar para a sociedade um curso também de doutorado. Subimos nutrição, que encaminhamos também a proposta e já foi aprovada, que já estava pronta, né? Ciência da saúde, que subiu para 6, que é o início do patamar de excelência, notas 6 e 7. Odontologia subiu para 5, saúde coletiva subiu para 5, gestão da qualidade em serviços de saúde subiu para 4, estou vendo a professora Cida aqui. O ensino na saúde, que também subiu, mestrado profissional. Então, o desempenho da área de saúde nessa avaliação foi muito boa. Significa dizer que na próxima avaliação nós não vamos subir da mesma forma. Conseguimos aprovar o doutorado, que deverá começar no ano que vem. Aí não depende da UFRN, não depende aqui do corpo docente, depende de uma portaria que tem que ser publicada pelo ministro da Educação após um parecer do Conselho Nacional de Educação. A nossa previsão é que em março do ano que vem a gente possa abrir a primeira turma para a oferta do curso de doutorado. Mas passamos aí também a sermos avaliados em um outro patamar, não apenas como curso de mestrado, mas agora com curso de mestrado e doutorado, que precisa mostrar na sua formação, na sua execução, uma produção científica qualificada. Não é quantidade, é qualidade. Que precisa que o corpo docente seja referência científica nas áreas em que atua. Que precisa de um grau de internacionalização muito alto. Ou seja, aulas como essa precisam ser corriqueiras no programa. Os nossos professores precisam sair, como já fazem, e ir para o exterior, e os alunos também. Com o doutorado a gente tem essa possibilidade de fazermos uma parte do nosso curso de doutorado no exterior. Com isso, a gente consegue ter pesquisas mais robustas, pesquisas mais completas, né, que melhoram o fator de impacto científico dos nossos trabalhos, e consequentemente a gente vai caminhando. É claro que na próxima avaliação nós não vamos subir de nota, isso vai precisar que a primeira turma de doutorado para nota 5. Mas da mesma forma que lá em 2008, 2009, nós planejamos a criação do mestrado, escrevemos propostas, conseguimos designar vagas docentes estratégicas com perfil adequado, nós precisamos pensar onde o programa de pós-graduação em educação física quer chegar daqui a 10 anos, que passa muito rápido, né? 10, 15 anos. Quando nós vamos chegar à nota 6? E o que é que nós precisamos fazer para isso e começar a trabalhar nessa direção, né? Eu digo lá para o nosso set lá de engenharia de materiais que o 7 pelo 7 não significa muito, mas ele precisa buscar o 8, mesmo a escala sendo até 7, porque se não buscar o 8 ele vai cair para 6 ou para 5, quando menos esperar. Então a gente precisa ter um planejamento, e por isso a universidade tem o seu plano estratégico que os programas fazem e que precisam cumprir rigorosamente, né? Vai ter uma tarefa árdua daqui a 1 ano e meio mais ou menos, quando Arnaldo vai ter que fazer um novo relatório do quadriênio 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, que foi muito bem feito por Eduardo Caldas no quadriênio anterior, de maneira muito... E o coordenador sozinho não consegue fazer, precisa da colaboração de todos os docentes, porque precisa estar escrito ali aquilo que os números não mostram, a qualidade e o impacto que cada dissertação, que cada tese de doutorado tem. Então, na universidade a gente está sempre terminando e começando, né? Todo dia eu assino um diploma, todo dia alguém novo é matriculado, um programa começa as suas aulas, está todo mundo aqui de caderno novo, né? Para começar o semestre, outro já de computador novo, né? Para acompanhar adequadamente o curso. Lá no final do semestre, todo mundo preocupado, porque estão chegando as avaliações, as cobranças são grandes, isso faz parte. O corpo docente, eu sei que cobra bastante, mas é para que a gente garanta que ao final o diploma não seja apenas um diploma, mas que a gente efetivamente seja mestre ou efetivamente seja doutor em educação física, preparado para atuar em qualquer lugar do mundo na área em que a gente foi formado. E isso exige muita dedicação, muitas noites pensando na dissertação, pensando na tese, né? Muitas ligações para o chefe do laboratório quando quebra um equipamento, ele me liga 10 minutos depois que vocês ligam para ele, né? Porque a gente tem prazo e as coisas precisam ser feitas com qualidade, né? Isso a universidade não pode, em hipótese alguma, abrir mão da qualidade de formação, da qualidade acadêmica, da qualidade científica. Então, bom semestre a todos, aproveitem a aula do professor Edmund, a quem eu já agradeço por ter vindo aqui ao Rio Grande do Norte. Eu sei que já nada com o professor Arnaldo nas madrugadas, né, natalenses, vai lá olhar o Morro do Careca pelo outro lado, né, e né, dentro d'água. Muito obrigado por ter vindo aqui. Sinta-se em casa, integre o nosso corpo docente, sinta que também é um pouco potiguar, também é um pouco brasileiro, porque está colaborando com a formação de mestres e doutores aqui na nossa instituição.
Obrigado, Rubens. Bom, agradecendo a palavra de toda a banca, toda a mesa, perdão, convido agora para que todos tomem assento na audiência e a gente encerra esse momento. Bom, pessoal, então, agora a gente dá continuidade, né, iniciar a palestra do professor Edmund Acevedo, e antes que ele comece, eu vou pegar minha cola aqui para ler um pouquinho sobre o currículo do professor Edmund, né? Professor Edmund Acevedo possui bacharelado em Educação Física pela Universidade de Springfield, mestrado em Fisiologia do Exercício pela Universidade de Maryland, e doutorado em Fisiologia da Atividade Física pela Universidade de North Carolina, em Greensboro. Atualmente é professor permanente da Virginia Commonwealth University e diretor do Programa de Acesso de Estudantes de Primeira Geração ingressante no ensino superior dessa universidade, além de ter sido chefe do Departamento de Cinesiologia e Ciências da Saúde por 10 anos. Professor Edmund Acevedo é membro do American College of Sport Medicine, do American Physiological Society, American Psychological Association, Association for Applied Sports Psychology, and National Academy of Kinesiology. Mais de 100 artigos publicados em periódicos científicos e 5 livros que, somados, dão mais de 4.000 citações, né? Além de ter orientado inúmeros estudantes de mestrado e doutorado de várias nacionalidades. O foco principal de pesquisa do professor Acevedo é o impacto do estresse mental e do nível de condicionamento físico na saúde dos indivíduos. Mais recentemente, seu grupo de pesquisa conduziu vários projetos de pesquisa focados no comprimento do telômeros, A atividade física previne o encurtamento prematuro do comprimento dos telômeros, que ocorre com níveis crônicos de estresse psicológico. Ao investigar os componentes celulares atribuídos à preservação do comprimento dos telômeros, seu laboratório fornece uma nova abordagem que ajuda a explicar os benefícios da atividade física para várias doenças crônicas. Além disso, ele também investigou a neuromodulação da percepção de dor. Atualmente, o professor Acevedo está em visita técnica aqui no nosso departamento, com bolsa da Fulbright Scholar, colaborando com pesquisas científicas na área da psicobiologia e da neurociência do exercício, em parceria com os professores Daniel Machado e Rasta Essanguedi. Bom, além disso, como disse o professor Rubens, e o mais importante, o professor Ed é meu companheiro de natação em Ponta Negra nesse período. Ed, you are my swimming buddy, the Ponta Negra Beach. Então, eu queria agradecer a presença do professor Ed, né? Ed, thank you very much for coming and are going to share your experience with us.
Obrigado.
Bom.
I also want to thank our esteemed colleagues who are up here welcoming all of us to this session. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Appreciate your comments. The first point I want to make as we start is a comment about the title of this presentation. And it has the word adventures in it, and I want to be clear that we share our understanding of what I mean by adventures. And here's where that comes from. My wife and I have been in Natal now for 6 weeks, and I have observed one of scenes. I have spent numerous hours watching her try new things and go surfing. And her name is Maya. She's a 4-year-old daughter of Dr. El-Sangedi. But that's what I mean. Sorry. That's what I mean by adventure. She's fearless. She wants to try new things. She seeks out sometimes danger. She trusts her instincts. And that's what, so she has the spirit of an adventurer. She has the heart of an adventurer. And that's what I'll be trying to display for you here in some of the projects that I'll be talking about. I also want to mention that this adventure has never been alone. It's really been with colleagues and students and so many folks along the way. So let's figure out where I'm from. We can start with that piece of adventure. I'm from right here in Virginia. This is our East Coast, right? Florida, we all know that. Nova York up here, right? Washington, D.C. I'm from right here. So if we look a little closer, I'm from Richmond, right here. Rare to get a brand new building and brand new equipment for the study of physical education or kinesiology. This is very, very rare. It took probably 23, 25 years of continually demonstrating our excellence and then continually asking for help. And we were way back in line, and finally we came up. So if you come visit, you'll be able to see this, and we'll take you for a tour throughout. Well, today this is what I'll be talking about. I'll give you a little outline of some of the things that I'll be talking about. It's really about a series of 3 areas of research that I've been working on for many years. You'll see that that went away, and now I have white hair. But we'll be talking about the physical activity and how critical it is for physical and mental health. We know this, right? All of us here know this. I'll show you a little, I think, interesting data, or I think it's interesting, so I'll show you that. I'm going to show you some research adventures in facilitating human performance. This was my initial research interest in terms of why I went to graduate school. So when I'm in some of the positions that you're in as graduate students, maybe just starting working, I was interested in helping athletes really run faster, and that was all. It was my only focus, and you'll see some of my research interest there. And then I'll talk a little bit about trying to understand the experience of physical activity. Can mental challenge alter affect or perceived effort to enhance performance? What can we do to kind of shake up the system and improve performance? And then perceived effort and affect, a little bit of a focus in that area that I've done a number of studies in, and that actually Dr. Gagey and I share. And then we'll talk about the influence of fitness on physiological responses to mental challenge during physical activity. And this really is about how stress, mental stress, influences our physiology, influences us physically. It's a bit of a jump in terms of my research interest, but I think you'll see how it's connected over the years. This is an easy, simple statement for us to understand, right? It supports the importance of being some muscles, enhancement of activities of daily living, and improvements in brain health. We had argument all day. I've seen Maya. She loves to run and play. I would argue that everyone in this room started life loving to move, play and run and chase other kids and climb things, maybe wrestle, maybe kick people and run, all kinds of things, right? I would argue all of us had that, but somewhere along the road, for many people, they lose that inherent joy of just being a child and just moving and experiencing life physically. As a matter of fact, if we look throughout history now, we've kind of evolved into this person. That's pretty frightening. It's most frightening. It's most frightening because from here to here, hundreds of thousands of years. From here to here, at most, 60 years. You see? So we've done more damage in 60 years than the tremendous benefits we have through evolution in hundreds of thousands of years. This is really amazing how humans have been able to. This is these redder numbers, orange, red, bright red, dark. This is when we're getting into very high percentages of the population that are obese. Right? Knowing that inactivity and obesity are linked, knowing that inactivity leading to obesity is most directly related to things like cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, hypertension. Right? Those are major health risks for all humans. But look at this. This is really amazing and dramatic in our country. If I try to look up some numbers in Brazil, this is what we find in the U.S. first. Overall prevalence of obesity in the U.S. is 41.9%. That's pretty high. The U.S. has the greatest number of obese individuals than any other country. We are excellent at being obese. Right? That's painful. That's painful. Much better than the U.S., but still a high number. Let's go further. Not only is it costly, but it's costly in terms of, in this case, mortality. Morbidity is kind of living with disease, right? Mortality is when you die. These are some dying numbers. United States males, life expectancy for males is 73.2. For females, it's 79.1. That's associated with these numbers. You can see some other countries here. But associated with these numbers is the fact that the year before COVID, a child born in that year in the United States had a life expectancy that was lower than that were in this circumstance. Here's the life expectancy for Brazil, 75.9, 72.4 for men, so you can see it's quite close, and for women, it's just slightly higher for women. Just to kind of compare the numbers, still, I think, alarming information. We can take these life expectancy numbers and we can see how much we spend per person for healthcare per year. The U.S., again, they're excellent. They're #1 in the world at spending money on healthcare. And their life expectancy is lower than all comparable countries. This is stunning. If I were from the U.S., oh wait, I am. But this is alarming. This is a problem. Remember, healthcare is supposed to be a plus in the U.S., and in many regards it is, but not when you look at this kind of data. Of course, I'm going to try to track down some numbers from Brazil. Here we see life expectancy, again, just off, just a little bit different, but look at the cost. Health spending in Brazil per person. I was stunned when I saw this number. But it speaks to many, many variables, much different systems, right? So it's impossible for me to explain this. I don't know enough about the healthcare system in Brazil. But the numbers here for me are stunning. The U.S. invests a lot more, but they don't live a whole lot longer. They're not living a whole lot longer. So for me, that's really, really telling. These are those numbers that we're comparing. We're getting a little bit of a gain here, but look how much we're paying for it, and look how much that cost is compared to other countries, and look at what their life expectancy is. Our argument in this room is that physical activity could address so many of the healthcare costs and needs of humans. That's what we have to try to be conscious of and try to convince the rest of the world as we move through our lives and our professions. Well, I'm really interested not only in kind of the physical health side, but how the mental health or mental stress in this case affects physical health. And incidentally, there's a lot of research here on stress and the heart. I wouldn't say a lot of research, but there's much more attention being given to the relationship of stress and the heart. And clearly, exercise is good for the heart. So this is a nice kind of mix or a model to examine and look at and see if we can learn more about how that works. And I'll be talking about that later on in the presentation. Big focus on the brain and research in our country in 1990. The federal government determined that the 1990s would be the decade of the brain, and they took billions and billions of dollars and funded research on how the brain impacts behavior, health, and all the rest of it. Very, very massive investment. And since then, it's carried on to a lesser degree, but still a tremendous focus on the brain. And exercise and mental health has been one area that's received a fair amount of attention in the literature. You may know this, most of you probably do, but exercise is good for depression, no question. Good for coping with anxiety, no question. Good. How do I do that? Magic. I'm really good at getting that to sound up. But it's really, really good at helping us cope with stress physically, physical activity. And physical activity is helpful in enhancing self-esteem. Those are the data is very clear. Those are 4 areas where physical activity is linked to mental health. For me, that's really interesting, and I choose one of those. I chose one of those to do research on. Again, you'll see in a moment. So take-home message number 1. This is a summary of the first set of slides here, right? First thing, physical activity is critical to physical and mental health. Inactivity and obesity are costly. They cost a lot of money in terms of morbidity, mortality, financial, actual money costs, but also family costs in terms of relationships. It can go on and on in terms of looking at the costs of inactivity. And we know that Maya is an adventurer and an excellent example of an adventurer. And one of the things that when I watch children, and Maya in particular, I want to be more like Maya, right? I want to try things. I want to climb trees again. I want to swim the ocean. I want to ride my bike wherever I can. I want to be that type of adventurer. And again, in terms of research, in terms of your career as a student, I think being an adventurer is amazing. And I've seen so many students and met so many students here who are really adventurous in learning more about research, learning more about their research questions, and learning more about opportunities to study in other countries. I should throw that in. So here we go. My interest was in me. That's where it started, right? I wanted to run faster, and I wanted to help other athletes run faster. So indeed, these are pictures of me. Can't tell because of the hair, but I was a very lean fellow, and I was a good runner. I wasn't great. That's why I'm here, but I was a good runner, right? And I just wanted to be better, right? I wanted to make the Olympic team and all that, and so I said, I got to figure this out. I was a smart kid. I want to figure this out, so that's where I spent my time initially. And one of the first studies that we did was looking at altering training intensity to improve the performance on already highly trained athletes, distance runners. And we knew that we wanted to look at maximal oxygen consumption, and I'll give you a little description of maximal oxygen consumption in a moment. But we wanted to look at maximal oxygen consumption because we know it predicts endurance performance, right? Can we change maximal oxygen consumption? By the way, we know that we can't, but we'll talk about that. And then what influence can we have on the onset of blood lactate accumulation or lactate threshold, right? And that's also linked to ventilatory threshold. I'm just going to give you a brief summary of these results. It was a study published in Medicine and Science and Sport and Exercise, maybe 1989, many years ago, right? Many years ago. But let's take a quick look. We're going to look at these two variables. Let's look at this first. VO2 max, maximal rate of oxygen consumption attained during physical exercise. And we can measure that in the lab. Everybody's taken, a lab course and figured that out. But higher VO2 max, greater ability to produce energy from aerobic sources at higher intensities. That's what we want to be able to do. That's running. That's distance running. And then predictive of endurance performance. However, we do know that it's genetically determined. What that means is you were born with a physiology that you got from your parents and their parents and their parents, and it limits your ability to improve your maximal oxygen consumption. It's a little bit like being, if you were born with a high VO2, right? It's a little bit like being born very tall and trying to play basketball. If you're born 7 foot tall, you can play basketball. You thought you might be, and you got that from your parents. VO2 is the same, except you can't see it. You don't know you have it. You got to try it. And then if you're not good, you probably don't have a high VO2. And if you're good, then you probably have one. That's how it works, right? But if you are already highly trained, then the idea is maybe you can't change your VO2. And the reality is you can't change your VO2. It's genetically. But you can change something called your lactic acid concentration threshold. This is even more highly correlated and related to your endurance performance. And we can make, if I can shift this over to a higher percentage of my VO2 max, I can't change my VO2, but if I can shift it over, I can run at a higher intensity longer. That's good. So if I change the training intensity of these highly trained athletes, can I make this happen? That's what this study was about. Here we go. Let's take a look. First of all, they did a 10K race pre and a 10K race post, eight weeks of training. Here, look what happens. They drop their time in the 10K by about a minute. That's pretty good. And these times are pretty good for 10K. They're competitive fellows. Sub-elite might be what it's called. And then they run longer on the treadmill. So we wanted to make sure that happened. It happened. Let's see what happens here. The VO2, pre-post. VO2 stays about the same, very small increase. That's actually what we would predict because we know it's genetically predetermined. You got it from your parents. If you're 7 foot tall, it's hard to imagine that after you train, you're going to be 7'2". Doesn't happen. You're still 7 foot tall. Here, you still have the same or about the same VO2. Let's see what happens to lactate accumulation. Sure enough, at these higher intensities, we see that there was a drop post-training, there was a drop in the amount of lactate that you're producing at these intensities. That was pretty cool. But let's see if that change, if that drop is related to the amount of improvement in performance, right? Let's see if those things are related. Does this change in lactate accumulation relate to that improvement in performance? Here we go. Here are the correlations. 0.69 and 0.72. That's pretty good, but wouldn't it have been a lot better if it was just one? It would make life easy. We would have figured out that all you have to do is train at a higher intensity, see the shift, whatever shift you see, boom, you're going to run faster. Now we know how to train people, everything would be solved. It doesn't quite work that way, interestingly enough. As a matter of fact, approximately 50% of improvement in performance is explained by something other than VO2 max and lactate accumulation. So if we're training you at high intensity, you improve your performance, but that improvement is related to many other factors, not just VO2 and not just improvements in lactate. It was kind of neat, and that article's been cited fairly often. What's that? Oh, good. Thank you. How'd that happen? Was that you? I was also interested in running far distances, like 100 miles. So let's learn about running 100 miles. Why in the world would anybody ever think of running 100 miles? One of the reasons I was running 100 miles is because I had run 10Ks and ran a marathon 228, pretty good, but I'm not winning any money. I got to pay the bills. So how about if I run further, right? Because that shouldn't be a limitation. So sure enough, I ran a 50-miler and came in 23rd in the country. Didn't make any money. So how about if I run 100 miles and I move up very high, maybe I can make money. That didn't happen, but I did want to learn more about it. So this student, John Noble, approached me about doing some research on ultramarathoners, and we went after it. This is the actual runners that we investigated. They're going to run 100 miles through the Sierra Nevada mountains, in in California. Here's the trail. This is what it looks like. It's in July. See, right at the end of June, and this is the kind of snow that we see. This is low snow, no snow season, and you still have snow at this elevation. Here's what it looks like, and you're coming from, this is Lake Tahoe out in the distance here, as you get at top of those mountains. But here's where the elevation where the race starts. You go up to close to 9,000 feet. And 9,000 feet is what? Close to 1,900 meters high. It's high. And it's not comfortable. Not comfortable. You can't breathe, right? Very difficult to breathe, very uncomfortable. That's the fun part. Because from there, you're going to go downhill, uphill, downhill, and oh, look at all this, all the way to over here. How many people have run downhill for a long distance? It is torture. It tears up your quads, eccentric contractions, delayed onset of muscle soreness, all of that. It really does tremendous damage to your legs. That's why this part was fun. You run through the night, often through the night. You actually start very early in the morning. The trail goes on and on and on. They usually allow about 350 runners. They limit it to 350 runners to protect the trail, and about half the runners will make it to the finish. Half the runners won't make it to the finish. There's too many things that go wrong, and generally they do. Here's what that looks like. Really, really amazing water crossings and a tremendous adventure. Maya would love this. A tremendous adventure. If we look at the results, and this is really just kind of about their experience. But the biggest, most important thing is it's no surprise that they're competent and they're committed to running. But they were lower on something called win orientation, and higher on goal orientation. They're more focused on their goals than they were about winning. They want to get there, they want to finish in a certain time, they want to be competitive, and among the competitors with them, they are not worried about winning. That's very different than most athletes. So this was kind of a unique twist on this type of athlete. And then there was no finishers, no psychological differences from finishers and non-finishers, no differences between males and females. When we did this work way back when, often we would see differences in males and females, and then they had predominantly external thoughts during running, discussion about internal and external thoughts during running at that time. It's a long story. They never or rarely experienced runner's high. It used to be thought that they must have runner's high, they must be high, when that would be the only explanation to be running 100 miles on these kinds of trails. But no, indeed, they reported, I don't know what that is, and I don't think so. So that wasn't the reason. And then psychological well-being and strength from running, there was a overlap between kind of their sense of psychological well-being and their ability to accomplish these tasks, and experience negative psychological states when unable to run. So this is approaching being addicted to running, because when they don't do it, they feel not good, right? And that area has been investigated since this time. So I decided I needed to try it, and so I ran 100 miles on this trail just to try it during the race, and I didn't get high. I did experience I think many of the other kinds of things that you have, and in the end, this is what I got: was a gold, a silver, bronze buckle that you get. That's what you get for finishing 29 hours and 42 minutes. That's a long time. I don't think I want to do that again, but it was a really neat experience, and one that if you ever want to do it, I'll talk to you about it. I went on and did ultra marathons. This is a 2.4 mile swim, not quite a 5K, less than 5K swim, 112 mile bike. It's a 150, 160 K bike, and then a marathon, 42K run, and under 10 hours for that kind of work. Pretty good. And in this sport, I was pretty good. I was 17th in the country. No money. So I had to go to work. And I kept studying. But then I thought, let's try the English Channel. What the heck? I've done all these other things. Let's give it a go. I can swim. Let's give it a try. So you think that you're going to be swimming from Dover to Calais right here in France, and you think you're going to go about 20.1 miles. What would that be? 35 kilometers, maybe. But indeed, what happens is you swim like this. And this is because of the current and the waves and the boat. Wow. And it's chaos. The degrees, the temperature there is about 56 degrees Fahrenheit. What is that? 13 degrees C? It's cold. It's cold. Again, remember the 100 miles? Miserable, 13. Terrible. What is it? 13 degrees C. That's the temperature of the water. That's very cold. Nobody should be in that cold water. That doesn't make any sense at all. But that's part of the challenge. Part of the challenge is to cope with that cold water. And this is a little bit of what it looks like. You can see that's just, there's big boats in the middle of it. 500 boats cross a day. It's a mess. It's a mess. Well, how are we going to I wanted to do it, right? And I wanted to learn about it. And I wanted to publish work on how to swim the English Channel. I had done some of these other similar. So I'm going to take this person, that's me, right? And I'm going to make them this person, because that's me too. And you're going to have to do this because it's cold. You have to create heat. You have to be very fit, but you have to have fat to protect as well, right? And I wanted to learn everything I needed to learn to accomplish this task. So what I did was I started to talk to folks, and this is one of the folks that I met. This is Alison Streeter. She's queen of the English Channel. 43 record number of crossings. 7 crossings in 1 year she's done. This is really unbelievable. She's the most phenomenal English Channel swimmer ever. And here we have she had the fastest women's record. She no longer does, but it was 8 hours and 48 minutes. She's done a swim, a 3-way swim, which means she swims across, stops. She has 10 minutes to feed, get something to eat. Within 10 minutes, she has to go back in, swim back across. And she has 10 minutes to feed and eat. And then she has to go back in, she gets back in, and she swims back across. This is tough. This is she is brutal. And she is wonderful. She's just a welcoming, she loves everyone to come to train. This is Dover Harbor, Dover, England. She loves everyone to come and train. She finds places for everyone to live. She organizes the training sessions for everybody from across the globe that come to Dover, England to do the swim. She's really phenomenal. So I had to get the 2 best support staff I could ever find. These are 2 students. This is Matt Heyman and Janet Haskins. 2 students, undergraduates. I said, I need help. I want to swim the English Channel. I know I can do it, but I don't know all the things I need to do to get this done. So we met, I'd say 2 or 3 times a week for about a year. And then I trained for a year in order to be prepared to do this. And then they came with me to England to see if we could get this done. We all came, with my wife and a couple of other folks as a team. And we found sponsors. We found people to pay for the whole thing. Right? So really phenomenal. That was an adventure. That was really cool. And to bring students along was really nice. But the first thing was, they're going to have to help me. They're going to have to help me by figuring out how to set up a contraption like this. This is pretty cool. You know how you get on the treadmill and you do a VO2 max test? This is a VO2 max test in the water. I'd never done this. I don't know what this looks like. I don't know if I'd ever read an article. But these 2 students, I said, yeah, well, go figure it out. Sure enough, they came back, and we needed to build this contraption. We didn't have any money. I didn't have any resources at that time when we were first starting. So I said, well, we got to find somebody that'll build it for us. They went to the engineering department and asked, can somebody build this? And a graduate doctoral student said, well, that's pretty cool. I'll build it. And so they built it for us. And we had to go, this is O2 analysis. I'm blowing into the instrument for oxygen analysis. And what we're doing is we're putting heavier and heavier weights into this bucket. And as I'm swimming, I'm staring at the bottom of the pool at a dot. And my job is to stay over that dot as they add weight into the bucket. So I'm not swimming any faster. I'm having to swim harder, a little bit faster, but just to stay in the same spot because I'm holding more weight. Really cool. Really cool. And we were able to develop a really nice device. Here's what it looks like from the other side. You can see a face mask, the whole thing, everything going right into the equipment. Really, it was ingenious for the kids, students to come up with this. And it was really fun. We also took blood samples because we're going to look at lactate again, right? See where lactate threshold is, all those kinds of things. Here's a picture of me in the ocean at night. We're going to swim at night. That's always fun. Some people can't do that. Some people get in the water at night, in the ocean at night, and they feel like there's things eating them, coming after them, like sharks and whales and whatever, red sea lions, whatever. I don't have, just get in there and go, it's cold, it's miserable, and you just keep going, right? And except that I did during a training swim once. I had a lamprey. A lamprey is like an eel, looks like an eel, and they have teeth, and they latch on, and they go like they're parasitic, so they bite into you, and they suck your blood. Yeah, I had heard it, but I didn't believe them. I felt something on my leg, and then I felt it between my legs during the swim. And when you swim, it's you get so cold, it's a bit numb. So you don't really feel very much. You feel cold, but you don't feel anything on your skin because it's numb. It's numb from the cold. So I felt something, in between. I was like, man, that's weird, So I don't know if I swipe, but I get out, and there's the mark of the lamprey. But I never saw him. So maybe it was a lamprey. I don't know. But we're going to figure out how much you have to drink. If you have to take in carbohydrates, right, water, in order to make it through. And I'm going to have to get used to the cold water. And there's no open cold waters where we were cold water areas where we were living in Kansas, right? So we had to set up a whirlpool with ice cubes. These are ice cubes in here, dropping the temperature below the temperature that we would below 13 degrees Celsius, so that I could get used to it, so that 13 degrees Celsius would feel comfortable. That would be the goal. But we looked at all kinds of variables, including body core temperature, to see how my body would adjust to exposure to this cold. We weren't sure that what the body would do. It may be that the body can't adjust so well. So we were a little bit worried about that. And then we've got all these other, this is Tracy with me, got all these other things that we do to kind of, for me, this doesn't keep you warm. They act like it keeps you warm. I don't think, but what it will do is jellyfish. So the jellyfish kind of hit that, and it's not likely that you're going to feel the jellyfish sting you, even though they are. So this is a little helpful in that regard. This is what we were able to determine. We used fitness information to prescribe training intensities and determine ideal stroke rate. We knew that my lactate threshold was going to be right about 130 to 135 beats, and that my stroke rate was going to be about 63, and I could maintain that for many, 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 many hours. We knew that. That was good to know. Determine fat insulation necessary to resist hypothermia at the ideal stroke rate. We take this ideal stroke rate, we look at oxygen consumption. That oxygen consumption is actually a measure of heat production. It gives you a direct measure of heat production. Well, if I'm producing a certain amount of heat, and I know what the water temperature is, there's a gradient, there's a difference there. If I want to protect myself from getting cold, I just need to put the appropriate thickness of fat between my body and the water. We were able to calculate. It was amazing. I couldn't believe these kids figured it out. But they took all kinds of crazy engineering numbers and all kinds of calculations. And we were able to figure out that I needed 13.88 pounds of fat weight gain. From the fat that I was there, I was already up to about 190 pounds at this time. I had to keep gaining even more weight, and I started at about 145 pounds, right? So 145, gained 45 pounds, checked my percent fat, still needed to gain another 14 pounds. That's really hard, especially when you're training 2 to 3 hours a day, and then twice a week, 4 to 6 hours on those days. It's really, really, really hard to gain weight. I had to eat grocery bags of food daily, and I didn't like to eat anymore. I hated it. It was really no fun at all. Determine necessary carbohydrate replacement. I needed 472 calories of glucose per hour. That's actually a lot, right? That's actually a lot, and it's pretty thick, and it's hard to drink while you're swimming. But we knew that's what I needed. And that would be if I was about 50% of the caloric needs for that hour were coming from fat. I knew that because I knew the respiratory exchange ratio at that percentage. It was amazing. It was so cool to figure this out. It was really, really fun. Subject acclimatization response to cold water to ensure appropriate time to acclimatization. It takes me 2 weeks before my body becomes acclimated to cold water. And it's very easy to see on the data because we did it 3 days a week, and you can see after the 6th or 7th exposure, 2 days, all of a sudden my body was normal in that temperature water. My body came back down. I was shocked. I can tell you that although my physiology had adapted, it was miserable. You're still freezing cold. You're still cold. The perception of shivering and cold to the being cold to the bone, it's miserable. But you're not going to die. You're not going to become hypothermic.
Oh, God.
We went back again another year to the English Channel the very next year because I hate to report that the first year we didn't make it. Vomiting, and I couldn't keep any food in. And we were a little over halfway. The weather was horrible. The water was horrible. Very rough. and it didn't happen. I was taking in too much salt water, start vomiting, and I can't stop vomiting. So it's over. They have to grab me and pull me out, and throw me on the deck of the boat, and we drive back. It's over. Done. That's it. So we went back the next year. This time, this student, who's a graduate student, now has a PhD. He finished his PhD and is a professor, full professor at a university in Louisiana. He said, I want to go. And I said, yeah, sure. What do you want to do? I knew most of the answers I needed to. He said, he wanted to learn more about kind of what the experience was like to accomplish this kind of task. So he interviewed 8 swimmers who had been successful in swimming the English Channel, and just trying to learn about what their interpretation of the experience was. First of all, they had a sense of mental toughness. They set goals very, very specifically. They used compartmentalization of time and or distance in trying to regulate how they were coping with the event. I can tell you, when you do real long events like this, one of the most challenging aspects is the first time you step into the water or the first time you start running. And when you start running, you know you might be running for the next 29 hours. That's a real hard moment to accept. You're like, oh, I think I want to go home. It's really a hard first step. Similarly with the English Channel. When you first get in that water, it is so cold. It is so uncomfortable. It's dark out. You're going into nothingness. And you know you're going to be there for many hours, and it's going to be miserable. Sometimes your stomach gets a little upset, what these swimmers would do is say, oh, no, I don't look at it that way. I just look at it as trying to get the first 10 minutes in. That's all they focus on. Because they know after 10 minutes, they're warmed up, they're steady state, the water's cold, but you don't feel like you're freezing anymore. So very interesting. And they would chop off little bits throughout the swim. There was a paradoxical euphoria and letdown upon completion of the swim. After they finish, it's not, yay, I finished. It's like, yeah, I finished, but I don't know. It's a confusing moment. Interestingly, many successful people have this response once they achieve their highest level. It's as if they're a little empty. The goal is kind of done. What's the next goal? Where do I go? And it's never, I hate to say it, but for many, it's not as good as they thought it was going to be. It's a very interesting phenomenon. Post-swim perception of increased occupational effectiveness, increased self-confidence, awareness of unlimited potential. The link between these accomplishments and how it's impacting their lives is very, very interesting. And this would be in support of Maslow, a famous psychologist, his notion that meaning from a peak experience augments daily life. There's a connection between these peak experiences in your life and how it impacts your daily life. That's actually really interesting. It's pretty cool. So running 100 miles, swimming the English Channel, doing an ultra-distance triathlon, these aren't things that just impact you in terms of accomplishment. They actually can impact your whole life. It's not quite like having a baby, right? It's not quite that, because that's often a peak experience. But it does impact your life, your daily life, in a unique way. That was a unique contribution to the literature at the time. We went to Canada to present this in Banff, Canada. Anybody been to Banff? You need to go. It's beautiful. It's an amazing area of the globe. It really is beautiful. We presented in this lodge here, and we took one day and we hiked all the way to this. I think it was about an 11-mile hike there and back. Just gorgeous. Lake Louise is up there. It's sort of every corner has this. Every little bend, every little corner has this kind of view. It's really dramatic. It's really beautiful. And one morning we woke up. It was in September. The conference was in September. Remember, this is a student and I at a conference in the mountains in Canada. We woke up to this outside. It was stunning and amazing. And they had moose. Their shoulders are about this high. I think they weigh 1,200 pounds. Very, very, very large animals. Walking in the street. They would just walk down the street. That was a bit concerning. Take-home message number 2. Science can predict, explain human performance, and describe the human experience of physical activity in unique ways. It's not just the physical that provides an understanding of the physical performance. Often to really understand what the athlete is going through or what the exerciser is going through, it's not just the physical, it's mental, emotional, and it can have lasting effects, which I think are important to consider when trying to understand human behavior. And I mentioned the start doesn't always predict the end, because I'm going to now take a shift and talk 2 more sections, and these sections are more in line with the research that I've been doing for 25 years. Right? That was when I was younger, a long time ago. Now we're going to pull it up to more contemporary research questions. So the first thing is just to look at perceived exertion and affect. I want to know what it's like when you exercise, and I want to know why it is that everyone doesn't exercise every single day, because I, in my life, have exercised every single day since when I can remember, meaning when I was maybe 3 years old. I just have to. I just want to. It's just fun. And I've done that forever. How is it that everybody doesn't do that when we're the same species, or I thought we were, right? So part of that is maybe it's because of how they're experiencing it. And for me, one of the highest motivators for behavior is doing something that feels good or helps you feel good or better. That's a high motivator for any behavior, right? So you're starving and you're driving home and you see a place to get something to eat. It's quick and it tastes really good. You're done. You pull over. It's going to make you feel better. You're going to get full. It's going to be great. And you're going to choose that instead of going home and maybe cooking some of your own food and having a healthier meal. It's easy. We are motivated by trying to feel better. So can we understand something about physical activity by looking at their affect and their perceived exertion? By the way, perceived exertion is how hard you're working. We've been looking at that for 80 years. And it tells us a lot of good information, but it doesn't tell us about what the person is feeling and sensing. And that's what links behavior to, or I should say, the individual to a specific behavior. And that's why what got me excited. So we're going to put people on a treadmill for 2 hours because it's so pleasant. And we're going to run them at a pretty good intensity. And we're going to put a catheter in there. Okay. Wrong. No worries. We're going to, we're going to put a catheter in their arm, and we're going to measure blood samples too to see what's happening physiologically, right? It's going to be really cool. And what we're looking for is if I can get their blood glucose levels to drop, they're going to be hypoglycemic, and they're going to be living a miserable life on that treadmill. I'd like to see that, right? Let's see if we can make that happen, because now I'm looking at their affect. I'm looking at their emotional state. I can alter that emotional state by making sure that they're miserable. And I can do that physiologically. So that's why the 2 hour was put there. So we're going to look at the ratings of perceived exertion scale. All of us have probably seen this. We might also, some of us might use the 0 to 10 or the 1 to 10 scale as well. And then we have something called the feeling scale. This is kind of a little different scale. You can see 0 is neutral, +5 is very good, -5 is very bad. So just a little slightly different scale. Just remember that the negative is the not so good, right? That kind of makes sense. Here we go. We're going to put folks on the treadmill. Here I am with dark hair, so this is still a while ago. Here's my mad scientist, my advisor. I don't think that looks like Daniel at all, but he's a mad scientist as well. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to ask them questions while they're on there, and we're going to draw blood. They have a little tube in their arm, right? And we're just going to go back in there and keep pulling blood. And we're going to be able to measure some really interesting things as they're running on the treadmill. You can see this was many years ago because there's no gloves. Right? Oh my God. I don't think I should be allowed to show these pictures, right? So very quickly, RPE, FS and RPE, here's that drop. We thought it would happen at 90 minutes, from 90 minutes to 120 minutes. We see a drop in FS. Remember that under zero is what we were kind of trying to get to. Didn't quite get there, but we got some drop. And this is RPE elevating throughout the run. And remember, they're at the same intensity, right? The average distance for these runners, by the way, they were runners, 16 miles. So they ran a pretty good distance. They came in unfed, right? Last meal they had was 5 o'clock the previous day, and they start running at about 8 o'clock. They get there about 7:15, they warm up, get them all set, and then they're running. So we wanted to get them hypoglycemic. So sure we did, by the way. And we didn't get the kind of response that we expected. It was related to glucose levels, though. In particular, at minute 90 and 120, glucose was more highly correlated to feeling scale than it was RPE. So we did get a little piece of the manipulation that we wanted. But I think the bottom line was these are runners. Like, they love suffering anyways, right? So I run them 2 hours. They're like, it's a Sunday morning run. This is good stuff. This is fine. They're not. It doesn't faze them very much. Versus if you took me today and put me on there, it would not be pretty. I would be complaining after an hour, easily, maybe sooner. So let's look at intensities then. So here's the next study. That was 2 hours. Now we're going to go different intensities, higher intensity. And let's take a look at affect and RPE again. Here we go. First thing is lactate. We're going to look at a blood sample. You may recall that, or I don't know if I mentioned this, but 4 millimoles of lactate, when you get above 4 millimoles of lactate, and this is 3, and this is 5, when you get above 4, intensity is very uncomfortable. All right? That's very uncomfortable. That would make you feel not so good. So we were trying to see if we could see this deviation in numbers in lactate for sure. And we did get a nice little jump there, and that's what we expected. However, when we go to feeling scale, RPE shows its general linear increase. When we go to feeling scale, we didn't see the dramatic drop that I would have liked to have seen. It would have been nicer to see a more dramatic drop, but we did see a drop. I was still interested in this lactate threshold or anaerobic threshold phenomena. So we had to do another study. Let's pull them in again. This time we're going to go proximal to the onset of blood lactate accumulation. We're going to determine where 4 millimoles of lactate are in terms of a speed on the treadmill, or very specifically, an oxygen consumption workload. We're going to go 10% above that, and we're going to go 10% below that. Now we're going to get a really close look at this intensity. What's happening here? Can we manipulate it? So they come in. My hair is starting to turn gray here from all the adventures. We're going to take some blood samples, a little different technique. Our techniques in blood sampling continue to change, a little different technique. And look what we see. This is 4 millimoles of lactate. This is RPE, a linear increase across. This is FS, a dramatic drop. That was really nuts. That was what I had been working on for probably 8 to 10 years of my career, was to say, what is the physiological anchor for emotion during physical activity? What is the physiological anchor? It's anaerobiosis. It's lactate accumulation. It's not a big surprise. I think if you're experienced with the exposure to being anaerobic, doing a lot of high intensity work, it doesn't bother you the same way. But if you're the general population, this is a point in exercise prescription that you shouldn't be putting people above that, because life is going to be miserable. It's not going to be fun. And so that's one thing to consider. We took this further, and we got money to do this work. This project was very expensive. This is a $400,000 project, right? So this is a very expensive project because we're going to look at sickle cell patients. We're going to take these sickle cell patients and we're going to say, can we and should we prescribe exercise to a sickle cell patient based upon their affect? Because they'll be able to tell you where their threshold is. We don't want them to go anaerobic. They could go into what's called a crisis, right? a sickle cell crisis. That's very, very bad. But they should be able to, if the data shows us, if we can show it, they should be able to tell us where that is. And so sure enough, here we go. If we look at this is the FS data. This is that gas exchange threshold, and there's where it drops. These are all, these other lines, these other variables, pretty much go straight up. You can see that their pain, this is a pain measure, the green measure, and the FS measure kind of do experience this precipitous or threshold either increase or decrease. So we do have the ability with a clinical group of patients who can tremendously benefit from the ability to prescribe their own exercise. We do have the ability to help them utilize their own self-perceptions to regulate their intensity and stay in a safe zone. Very, very interesting work. This led to an invitation to present some of our research in Greece for the European College of Sports Science. How many European College of Sports Science? Anybody been to that conference? It's really a very, very big conference. It's a tremendous conference. And I was thrilled to be invited to present there. And as you know, this is a picture of the first modern Olympics, 1896 in Athens. And so we went to go see it. This is what it looked like when we went to visit. Really an amazing place to be. I have to tell you, I'm not a historian, right? And as a matter of fact, when I was young and when I went to college, history was not my favorite topic. But when you go see history, when you're there and you observe and you imagine what happened there, you really get into history really fast. It really can have a dramatic effect. So we went there, and there we are right here. I'm here again, and these are two of my close colleagues from the U.S. that traveled with me to the conference. Here's the Acropolis. Of course, we went to go visit the Acropolis, amazing. And then we went to Olympia, where the first Olympics were. Probably, it looks to be, as I recall, 1,500 years ago, right? So now you get to go visit and see where the Olympics started over 1,500 years ago. Pretty amazing. In addition, the ruins are still there. This is where the flame starts every 4 years for the next Olympics. 1 year away from the Olympics, they start the journey. You know, they light the flame and somebody starts, and they hand it and they relay all the way to the location. This is where it starts. This is the Olympic track, an entrance into the Olympic track. And then this is the track. And there was a group of children that were running races on the ancient Olympic track. Pretty amazing and really a tremendous opportunity. Of course, I was in Greece, so I went to the Greek Isles. This is what they look like. They're pretty fantastic as well, pretty amazing. So we did these RPFS studies, and we came up with, Dr. Ekakakis, and I'll mention him later as well, we came up with a model to kind of look at how all this might work. This article has been published, and this kind of anchored and elevated the field to some degree, and this is 22 years ago, so this is a while ago. And this was the model. All it said was, there's a lot of things happening up here, and there are a lot of factors that are impacting what's going on up here, and it's all in a feedback format. Everything is feeding forward into this, right? And it just was a way of kind of putting all this stuff together so people could think about perceptions and affect, and also how physiology is interacting with what's going on in the brain and our perceptions. So after that, got invited to Perth, Australia. That's the west coast of Australia. Perth is a beautiful place. I had an opportunity to present at the University of Western Australia. Their west coast is beautiful. Not as beautiful as Natal, but it's beautiful. And the city is just about as big as Natal. Perth is actually right about 1 million people. It might be bigger now. And from there, I went up to Edith Cowan University, which is north of Perth. It's a bit more rural. This is where that university is. It's pretty stunning, very, very beautiful. And when I was there, they had this fellow on campus, just kind of romping around among the kids and all kinds of weird stuff, but pretty cool. So take home message number 3. We only have one more after this, so we're getting close. Right? Perceived effort and affect are distinct. They're different. It's important to appreciate that when working with humans. Affect may predict adherence. We need to learn a lot more about that, but that's kind of important. And then I should have to mention Dr. Hassan El-Sangiji has been doing work in this area. I know Dr. Machado has joined him on a couple of projects, but this is really cool. He's taking it to another level. And when I read this article, that's why I said I want to learn from that guy, El-Sangiji. Hassan. I want to work from Dr. Hassan, right? Because he looks at this differently than I do. And I would like to do more work in figuring out all the factors that play a role in how a person's affective responses are influenced and how that predicts if they're going to come back and continue to exercise. And so that's part of my Fulbright scholar, is to come and work with Hassan and try to figure this out. And we're really close to getting a nice protocol done to examine a research question there. Well, I'll quickly go through this. I had another student. She was from Thailand, and we did a really interesting study. This was a while back as well. This article has been cited a fair amount. Is this inspiratory muscle training, right? Inhale and you build your inspiratory muscles. I'm sure you've seen it. It's everywhere, and they sell these devices. Well, this was done 20 years ago, and they don't work. 20 years ago. But we still sell them, or no, you can still buy them, right? And they're still trying to be sold, and it'll be, I think it'll last maybe another year or so, and people will realize, oh, this is ridiculous, right? They'll put it back, and then 20 years from now, they'll come back, right? Because that's just how it works, and people are always looking for something else that might work, it might help them. I should tell you that this didn't work for endurance athletes that were already trained. It may work with individuals who have some kind of pulmonary disease. So you remember that it doesn't work for athletes, but it might work for somebody who actually needs it, right? That individual may experience the benefits. Well, Uli invited me to Thailand. She was in Chiang Mai. Chiang Mai is in the north of Thailand, a very beautiful area in the jungle. And she invited me to present there. I just want to show this picture real quickly, not just because my hair is not white, but actually because of this person here. He was invited to the U.S., or to learn about building prosthetics. He was the first individual from Thailand who learned how to make prosthetics in the U.S. and came to Thailand to make prosthetics, primarily for children who are missing a limb. And so he is held in the highest regard in that profession there in Thailand. And it really was amazing to meet this person who really had changed a major area of healthcare for people in his home country. Wow, that is so cool. And he's just a nice guy, just went to learn something, brought it back, and just kind of sharing it with people and training others on how to make these prosthetic devices. Someone is feeding me food somehow. I don't know why that's happening. Please. Here's a taxi. I thought I'd show this. But I do fit in these taxis. I did use them. There were no Ubers back then. But I thought that was kind of funny. But I also tried elephant. I went out to the jungle and went on a tremendous elephant walk through the jungle. This was really amazing and really cool. It's an elephant kind of farm where they take care of elephants and they feed them and they try to keep them from running over other people, things like that. Got a chance to feed them. Really, really cool. Chiang Mai is a very, very amazing town. It has more temples than any other city in the world. And these temples are really, really quite dramatic. And that's me standing there, so you can get an idea of how tall and impressive that temple is. And the city itself is beautiful. It has a moat around the whole city that was built thousands of years. Really, really tremendously amazing. So now I'm switching into the last area of research. I'm not going to spend too much time here. I'm learning. Maybe not so fast, but I'm learning. Here we go. I'm interested in this stress stuff. I think, for me, exercise is the best stress reducer ever on the planet. And it's always been that way. I'm high energy, edgy, always looking for something not quite like mine, but I can see a lot of myself in her. And I need to exercise. And it helps me come right down. But the research in this area is very, very limited. I wanted to look at it. We'll talk a little bit about it here today. We're going to focus on something called the physiological toughness and the cross-stressor adaptation. This simply says that, in a sense, you can train your body physically to cope with a mental stress that causes a similar physical response. Right? So I get stressed out, heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, all these stress hormones are released. Same thing happens when I do physical activity. I can toughen my body through physical activity so that when I'm faced with the mental stress, I'm more capable physiologically to handle it. That's where that whole picture comes from. Stress, inflammatory cytokines, cardiovascular disease. Now we're getting into cardiovascular disease and this linkage between stress and cardiovascular disease and how physical activity might help to alleviate that. Here we go. Obesity is a chronic stress. Obesity actually is a pro-inflammatory stressor. It is a low-grade pro-inflammatory stressor. This would tell us that, indeed, if exercise is anti-inflammatory, this would be another benefit of exercise and to counter the effects of obesity. Very, very interesting. And we'll talk about that. So when we're talking about stress, it's the central nervous system. It's being activated in response to some challenge. Right? Pretty simple. And actually, we're only talking about this branch of the nervous system when we talk about it. And we know that this branch is called the fight or flight, right? When we are stressed, we are immediately preparing our bodies to fight or flee. We are programmed to do that. That's how the body works. It's an amazing body. We've evolved so that it's a sophisticated system. I have to tell you that it instantly is ready for physical activity. You are at alarm within 2 seconds. So that's a little quicker. The system doesn't turn off that alarm for 15 minutes. All the turn-off mechanisms, led by the release of cortisol. You go to the next slide. You're activating here from the central nervous system. You're going to release norepinephrine and epinephrine. And all of this is going into the bloodstream. We're going to be able to see it. And throughout the system, you're going to be activated and ready for action, period. Physical movement, period. This branch, cortisol, turns this stuff off. There has to be a mechanism to turn itself off. This branch does that. Cortisol does it. But it doesn't appear in the blood for 15 minutes. That's it. That's how you were born. If you haven't been able to outrun your threat, that saber-toothed tiger that you were running away from 100,000 years ago, right? If you aren't able to outrun them in 15 minutes, you're going to die. Well, sorry. But it's programmed that way. But in today's world, how many stressors last 15 minutes or less? Not many, right? If you're stressed about paying bills, if you're stressed about schoolwork, if you're stressed about work, if you're stressed about a relationship, right? Most stressors are prolonged in society today. And our bodies aren't built for it, right? And to cope with it. So that's why stress has this very negative effect on us physiologically, because we aren't prepared to cope with it. Okay, here we go. So what are we going to do in life? We're going to take this person, we're going to have them play on a computer, and we're going to activate their brains. We're going to stress them. That's going to be our stressor. I'll talk very little about that in a moment. Then what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that they're activated. We're going to measure some cardiovascular reactivity measures, heart rate, right, blood pressure, little measures. This tells us that you have activated your fight or flight response. Very easy measures, we're in the game, right? But we can also measure things happening in the blood, right? We can measure catecholamines and cortisol. This gives us much more evidence and clear evidence that we've activated the system. Remembering that these are meant to turn off in 15 minutes, turn off in 15 minutes. We don't see that in the real world today for most of our stressors. we're going to get this from the blood. And this is what the blood looks like when we spin it down, right? We have red blood cells. We've got something called a buffy coat. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we have the fluid portion of the blood. Most of what we measure is in the fluid portion, but I am really most interested in this portion. So we're going to pull this portion out over here, and we're going to spin it down, right? And we're going to look at these PBMCs, peripheral blood mononuclear cells. The reason I'm looking at that is because that's where our inflammatory cytokines are. See how I got there? And I want to look at inflammatory cytokines because they're linked to heart disease. And that gives us a mechanism to link mental stress to heart disease, because these inflammatory cytokines play a critical role in the rate at which we put plaque on our coronary arteries. What a story. Isn't that wonderful? It's really amazing. That's really interesting. And I can now say that when I get activation up here, I might be able to, I should be able to, if it's an inflammatory, I should be able to see some of these inflammatory markers alter. Interestingly, we got really excited. We, mostly my students, got really excited because they wanted to look at specific inflammatory markers, inflammatory cytokines. This is a cell wall. They wanted to go through the cell wall and look what's happening in the cell. They got crazy. I was not trained in this. I'll show you some of the students. They said, well, this is what we're going to do. I said, I'm looking at the wrong guy. But I said, that is a brilliant question. So let's work together to figure it out. And sure enough, we found collaborators on campus that helped us figure this out. Really amazing kinds of work. So let's take a look at this. Over the years, starting in 1999 up to where we are today, we started looking at some of the measures we just talked about: cardiorespiratory measures, stress hormones, immune responses, inflammatory responses, and then the mechanisms in the cell. We also looked at individuals who were athletes and then ended up looking at older individuals and people with obesity. That was throughout the years so that we get a really better, much clearer look to see what's happening. So here's our first study early on. And the first study was simply trying to alter, can we alter physiological responses to stress during physical activity? And this is with athletes again. So we're going to challenge them while they're on the treadmill. Watch what we do here. This is kind of interesting. They're going to watch a video. This is a large screen for 1989, right? On this video with a VHS, anybody remember VHS? Probably not, but we videotaped the best runner in the whole region. Everybody knew the runner on the screen. He's the best runner. And we said, you're going to run at the same intensity as that runner is, at the same relative intensity. That person's running at 7% of their max, you're going to run at 7% of your max. And then we're going to bring you back on another day, and you're going to run at 95%. You're going to see that runner running at 95%, and then you're going to run at 95%. And we hope you can run that for 20 minutes, right? So here we go. Here's the data, right? Oh, I forgot to tell you. They do the 70 first. We told them it was going to be counterbalanced, right? It's not counterbalanced. They all do 70 first, and then they come back for the 95. On the 95, we say, here we go, this is the video, and then I go to the treadmill buttons, and I go, something's broken, it's not working. I can't change the treadmill speed. We're going to have to stay at this intensity. See what we did? We're trying to stress them out, and we're seeing if physiologically there's a change or a shift, right? But the workload stays the same. Here we go. First thing is, this is the proposed challenge, right? This is the fabricated feedback. Look at this. Anxiety was higher. This is the state anxiety inventory. They were stressed out. We got them a little stressed out. They were ready to go. They were like, okay, I'm ready. Let's have at it. Now remember, here's what's really cool. When they're watching somebody going 95%, that's the best runner they know. They're going to run 95%. This is fair. Let's see who's tougher, running at their same percentage. This is a very cool manipulation in the lab. And it worked really well, because if you're at 95% and we go hard as we can, right? The thought is the tougher runner is going to win, not the one who has the higher VO2 max, right? So it's really an intriguing protocol. and we were able to kind of pull it off. Look at this. This is, here it is. This is heart rate, the same exact heart rates. They were more anxious, but their heart rates were the same. Cool. Ventilation, more anxious, ventilation the same. Here's what we think was happening. That's that physiological toughness that we were talking about. Their bodies know what they're doing. These are sub-elite athletes. You can't make these guys nervous, right? They know, their bodies know the work they're doing. We couldn't rally. But it also means that if it's an unfit person, we should be able to rally, right? So we're going to go there next. And what we know is there's this cross-stressor adaptation that's clearly identified for fit individuals. But that would mean that we don't have it for unfit individuals. So, of course, we're going to bring in some high and low fit individuals. Pretty close. We're going to play a little different game. You can't tell an unfit person that they're going to run at 95% for as long as they can. What will they do? See ya. Why would I do that? They're not going to. We thought they would do it just like we do, right? Just get in there, give it a go. Now they're like, no. They just wouldn't do it. It was not conceivable, so we had to change the manipulation, and we simply caused a regular laboratory-induced stressor. And this is what we used was a mental arithmetic and a street color word task. There's a specific way of how we do this. But you're shown the color blue, but the font is in red. You have to report the color of the font. Humans are not, adults are not very good at this. They get it wrong a fair amount. And then while you're doing it, we tell you, oh yeah, most people do better. And so we give you a little nudge in terms of being self-critical about your abilities. Okay, so here we go. Low fit demonstrated a greater increase in heart rate response compared to stress. And this further supported the Dean-Spear model of physiological toughening. So indeed, the low fit individuals were more susceptible. We wanted to look at a population where this would be important. And Heather Webb here, one of my students, came in, and it took her about 5 or 6 months to figure this out. It's all about these firefighters. And here she was, looking at firefighters. She said, firefighters die of heart disease at a higher rate than any other group of workers, right? Like professors, like business people and lawyers. Firefighters die of a higher rate of heart disease than any other group. This was really interesting. Her proposal, and my thoughts were, is it because they're experiencing dual stress, right? They have mental stress and physical stress. Could this exacerbate their response to the stress? So sure enough, she did a couple of really nice studies here. Firefighters have one of the highest rates of on-the-job heart attack deaths among all occupations. Heart disease is the primary cause of in-line-of-duty deaths for firefighters. And multiple studies have shown that firefighters have increased mortality ratios of ischemic heart disease compared to other cohorts. That's the story. That's the story. They're dying of heart disease. And maybe it's because of this dual stress. Here we go. So we're going to come in. It works. You're being asked to respond to that video, and it's a real fire. Their job is to answer questions about what to do. That's called a firefighter strategies and tactics drill. Very common in the United States. They're told that their performance will be given to their fire chief. We can't do that, but we can tell them we're going to do that. That's the stressor. What happens physiologically becomes really interesting. Here's our setup and what it looks like. We know that under physical stress alone, we should see certain responses, and then with psychological stress added, there should be an additive response. if this is what's happening and what we should be concerned with for firefighters. So sure enough, this is what we see. This is the stool challenge condition, we call it here. And you can see heart rate is elevated, respiratory rate is elevated, ventilation, and BE over VO2, or efficiency of ventilation. Epinephrine is elevated, norepinephrine is elevated. This is all indicative of a higher risk for heart disease. This is a nice story to tell in describing the critical importance of physical activity, because remember, the fitter ones should demonstrate less of a response. So we need to keep them fit. Going through here, cortisol is elevated. You can see cortisol in the recovery at about 15 minutes, exactly what we'd expect. And this led us to visiting Turkey to present our research. This is Istanbul. We were out in Bolu, out in the outskirts of, or the countryside, a very amazing university there. Hot water baths and all this steam, whatever. Beautiful, beautiful area. Then, this is one of our last investigators, but Chung Yung Huang came to my lab, and he had better ideas than the ideas we've ever had in the lab before. And sure enough, he tells us we got to go back and we got to look in the cell. We have to play with this part more. And these were techniques that we didn't know about. And this is what he added, some really tremendous work. If we look at the model, he's saying that if all this happens, then this should happen. And if this is going to happen, in an elevated inflammatory response, then we're going to end up with heart disease. So let's figure out if we can look at the system. I'm not going to go through this slide. We're running a little late. But let me just say that altered function of this inflammatory response is linked to cardiovascular inflammation and plaque buildup. And then both mental stress and obesity are linked to the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. I mentioned that earlier. Here we go. Very complex methodology in the lab. The patient, I was going to say patient, but the participant's going to be there for about 2.5 to 3 hours. One shot. We pay our subjects to participate, so they make a little bit of money, not a lot, but they make some money. And then we spend days and weeks in the lab analyzing our results. Suffice to say that sure enough, our inflammatory cytokines are activated in this dual stress condition. We wanted to go further and look at something called leptin, in particular for obesity. If we go further, Heather came in as a master's degree student and said, you need to look at leptin. Leptin is important, in particular for women. Let's look at it. We were looking at men, but she was interested in women. Sure enough, leptin showed what's called a blunted response to the stressor. This is not good, and it was shown only in the obese, or more so in the obese population. Phil comes in and does some great work stimulating cells, challenging cells. We take 1 million cells. You have to count. Our undergraduates count 1 million cells. They take the blood, they count 1 million cells through a microscope, 1 million cells, and then put that, and we can do all kinds of things into our tests. Very amazing. Blake came in and just did some great work looking within the nucleus. This is crazy. He went into the nucleus to see if we could trigger and if the responsible trigger was appropriately activated. Very amazing work. This is what those results look like. And sure enough, we saw it. And then Aaron, our last student in the sequence, came in and said, you're all wrong. It's really about the age of the cell. And when we look at the age of the cell, we look at telomere length. Telomere length. And sure enough, he figured out how to measure telomere, and we saw a relationship between telomeres and the pro-inflammatory response. Really interesting work, the areas of work that we're going to continue to look at for some time now. These are the folks that have played critical roles in doing the research, all on different teams. This does not include undergraduates. We have a whole slew of undergraduates that also have participated in other presentations. I include my undergraduate pictures, but here's a little too much. I've had other collaborators. I've had an opportunity to publish a number of books. Here's the first one, 23 authors, 5 different countries, 17 chapters. This was 36 authors, 5 countries, 23 chapters. This was 137 authors, 12 different countries, 73 chapters, 2 volumes. I'm trying to contribute to all of these international and all of these tremendous and important contributors. Mental stress can influence the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Physical activity may serve to undermine this influence. Dr. Machado's work on transcranial magnetic, where does that come in? Because I'm also collaborating with Dr. Machado. Dr. Machado published this article, and I read it and I thought, and there's some challenges with this transcranial direct current stimulation. And I found it interesting because in our country, we use transcranial magnetic stimulation. We had been working on this project for years, and we recently published it. But I thought, our transcranial magnetic stimulation is pretty consistent, pretty effective. It's very expensive. The direct stimulation, not expensive and confusing. If we can figure out, some of the data is confusing, if we can figure out what's happening there, direct current would be where to go. And so Dr. Machado and I have been working and talking about getting that going. Thank you. And may the adventures continue. Thank you for staying. I apologize for taking so long, but I really do appreciate it.
My bad.
That was me again. I really do appreciate you coming and participating. The big question is whether you're going to be able to say a hearty yes to your adventure. What's your next adventure? So I hope that you take some motivation, some thoughts, and again, thank you for being here.
Thanks again, Eddie, for sharing your experience, research experience. Question?
Pessoal, quer algumas perguntas? Faz tradução. Mas leva lá, leva lá.
Congratulations for your expo. What are the relationship of culture of movement to reduce the stress? The movement of one culture.
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 Culture. Yeah.
Culture.
Yes. So, no question that culture influences. I got it right here.
I forgot I had this. Congratulations for making it through the whole presentation. The question is the influence of culture on stress and physical activity. Is that the question? Yeah, here we go.
How culture influence stress reduction is?
Yeah. So there's no question that culture influences maybe most of our behaviors, right? If we simply look at it, one level of superficial look is soccer, right, here, football, here, and American football, right? Culture influences our orientation to wanting to watch large people run into each other and run over each other. A cultural difference here in Brazil is that that's not necessary for sport, right? That's not important. It's a very simple way, or a simple example of the influence of culture on movement and choice of movement. If we go further, in terms of all these research questions, what makes me stressed and anxious, right, is different than what makes somebody else stressed and anxious. In our culture, everything is about money, right? And there are some misunderstandings that if you work harder in our country, you make more money. The reality is that doesn't always work that way, right? I think that kind of cultural influence is a little different here. I sense that working harder and making more money and wanting to do that and having to do that and that's the only way to live, I don't sense that the culture here is as dramatic or intense. And indeed, when I was in Thailand, that was not there at all. Right? It's just a whole different look. If we try to then link it to actual physical activity for health, that's a whole other perspective. And the reason for that is in the U.S., we look at physical activity, it's hard to describe, but it's after work, if I have time, including socialization, right? All these things. It's kind of a programmed, scheduled event. That's easy for many Americans because we don't work with our bodies. I sit at my desk, I play on the computer, right? So I need exercise, I have physical energy. Many Americans are that way. But in many other countries, cultures might include physical labor, and much of the population might be physical laborers, right? If that's the case, to include physical activity after work, when you're exhausted, that's a pretty high hurdle, right? That's very different. Also, culture and how we take care of our children and what we support for physical activity in our children, and all those factors play a role in all our behaviors related to physical activity. And what that means is we need different ways of influencing people's behavior to be more physically active. We have to be creative. We have to be different. What works in the U.S. is not likely to work in Brazil and many other countries. So that has to be included in thinking about how to take something that works in the U.S. or any other country. UK is another big example. And trying to adapt it to your culture and seeing if it can work.
Pessoal, mais alguém? Pode fazer em português e a gente traduz.
May I?
Yeah.
Yeah, just to try to cover something that was asked us before. How is the relationship between this line of research, most quantitatively that you used during your career and your international research adventures, with other research approaches such as qualitative data analysis? In one of the studies you mentioned that one of your PhD candidates went to the UK to take a look on how people feel, and during your career and all this period that you mentioned, did you had contact with researchers using other approaches, and how was the relationship? How do you see, because as I mentioned to you, we have here one view of physical activity and movement that is applied basically in a school environment, and another view that is outside the school environment. So can you comment on that a little bit, please?
Yeah. The notion that one group of researchers utilizing different strategies or certain strategies to answer research questions would compare themselves and struggle with understanding another group of researchers that use a different set of protocols. That's normal. That's because we don't understand each other. We don't even speak the same language. We don't run the same statistics. We don't run statistics. It's very normal. And of course we have that in our departments as well. The critical aspect is to think about contributions to developing knowledge, right? And ensuring or challenging all groups to say, what is my contribution to the development of knowledge in my field? Now, in our discipline, we work very closely with physical therapy. There are some physical therapists that don't develop knowledge. They use knowledge and they implement that, and they train other professionals to implement. That's a different profession. for us. If you're a professor, you're getting tenure, and you're doing research, then the challenge is to show that the knowledge that you're contributing and developing to your discipline is of value. That's what it should be, right? Because I can't judge it. I'm not that person. Early in my career, though, I did qualitative work. And some of that qualitative work has received positive reviews. That was 30 years ago, right, 34 years ago, because I was interested in knowing certain questions, right? I had a question. The techniques that I had in the lab, in physiology and in psychology, were not sufficient, so I had to learn different techniques. That exposed me to qualitative methods and the importance of asking questions about meaningfulness. What does this mean to me, right? But as a physiologist, that's a very foreign question, and no physiologist in their right mind would ever think to address that question or step into that environment, right? But I wanted to know, and I had great students that could help, and so we reached out and we learned. But we've done that every step of the way. The advanced techniques that we now use to look within a cell and look within the nucleus. This is, I would never have imagined this when I was in graduate school, finishing my PhD. You could measure something in the nucleus. My students taught me how to do that. That's the wonderfulness. I think that's the amazement. That's the adventure in a career in higher education and research, is that there's always another adventure. But because I am open to that and I want to learn that, I also want to learn about the meaningfulness. I also want to learn about, well, you do qualitative, what questions are you answering? What contributions are you making? I'd like to learn about that, because that's important to me too, in terms of meaningfulness in a human experience. That's how I think.
Well, the experiments I saw that you did, they were more like an episode of stress, not a chronic exposure to stress. As a burnout syndrome person that I am, I see stress chronic as something that goes with time, not an episode. So can the experiments you did relate to a chronic kind of stress?
You know, that's a great question, and one that we confront in our lab all the time, right? Because chronic is going to be very different than an acute bout, right? A short-term acute bout, very different to see chronic. We attempted to do a number of studies on chronic stress, primarily with healthcare workers in high-stress positions, right? And we wrote a proposal and tried to get some funding to do that work, and it was not funded, so we went a different direction. And we began to look at obesity as the chronic stress. So we cheated the psychological stress area by choosing to do obesity as the chronic stress. It's not a fair comparison to actual mental stress or burnout, as you described. That research is just very hard. You can imagine tracking people. You can imagine all the measures. You can imagine, the challenge of getting people to be committed to the protocols. But that's what would need to be done. And it's a far more challenging research area. But I think that our proposal is that acutely we learn kind of the first steps. And maybe what we're learning is that these first steps just linger longer. And now we can guess or hypothesize about what the actual consequences are for chronic exposure to the stressor. It's the best we can do right now, but that's an area of research that really needs to be investigated.
Ed, thanks a lot for your talk. It was incredible to see all your research and coming together and everything you showed us. I have a take on a different perspective, because here we are young researchers, most of us mostly, and we're going towards starting our PhD, and you having this excellent career that you had. I wanted to ask you what sort of tips you have to us and some lessons, good lessons you've taken from your career. If you could help us with that, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. All the student pictures there are all my students. Most of them PhD students, a couple of masters, and then the undergraduates initially on the English Channel publications. Doing research, well, it's not easy. If I made it look easy, outside of the sounds that I made from the microphone here, a part of me needs to apologize. This is very hard work. It costs money. You have to bang your head against the wall regularly. It's a grind. We call it a grind. I just did, an hour and 15-minute presentation on 34 years of work. Starting at a pretty superficial questionnaire level, the O2 max level, and going to a level of looking within the nucleus of a cell. My wife could tell you that, let me see if I have a slide here. Here it is, look. It's your wife. She wants you to know if you'll be home this week. And the scientist asks, I'm married? Right? That's what it takes. That's what it takes. It doesn't take that all the time. It doesn't take that every week. But there are times when the investment doesn't look to be equal to any reward you could imagine. However, and this is really important, I'm not doing the work for me, right? It's not like I don't do it for me. I was doing it for athletes. I was doing it for firefighters. I kind of care about firefighters. They're critically important people, right? I care about people who are emergency care workers, and I get to do research that might help them. I care about helping people make better decisions about their health, and I can figure out ways that might help them to make better decisions. As a graduate student, it's important to appreciate that it's going to be tough. It's going to take a lot of time. There's going to be some struggle. It's going to be sacrifice. You're going to wonder if you're still married, right? You're going to need support people to help you get through. And then you have to realize that it's less about you and hopefully more about helping somebody. Somebody, and maybe a lot of people. When you go to work that way, you might be able to maintain that sense of adventure that Maya has for every day, right? You might be able to do that. Yeah, you got to try to find something that you really like and that's meaningful. Yeah, and if it's not, I don't see why you would do it.
Okay. Thanks again. Congratulations for this amazing journey. Bom, pessoal, espero que vocês tenham gostado. Então, estou agradecendo de novo aqui o Ed por compartilhar um pouquinho a experiência dele. E acho que a gente finaliza por aqui. Obrigado aí pela presença de todo mundo. Até uma próxima.
Boa! Pretty good.